2017 was an interesting year. In February, we lost my grandmother. My grandmother all her life was a giver. She made sacrifices to raise her children, and she was a great grandmother. She helped raise her friends' children. Cece gave for most of her life. She lives through other people she touched, and as beautiful as that is to me, I would have liked to seen Cece take for once. Cece was such a genuine, sweet person and always helping others. That made it all the more harder when we received a phone call telling us she had a stroke and it wasn't looking good. This really tested my faith. I sat there and I thought to myself, didn't she give enough? Why couldn't she be there to see all our grandkids graduate high school or even college? This made me angry. Why would I believe in a God who would do this to me and my family? This was a low point in my faith. 10 months later, my grandfather passed away. He came over for Christmas dinner with his wife. My mom and I went to church on Christmas Eve, while my dad and his father stayed home to cook. When we got home, I found my dad performing CPR and my grandfather in the living room. He passed away on Christmas Eve, 2017. He was a flawed father, but to pay back for his mistakes, he was a wonderful grandfather. And in return, we lost him too early. My dad and my aunt lost 2 parents that year. I thought, why would I believe in a God who would do this to my family? Why does he get to pick and choose who lives and who dies, and why them? I questioned faith, and I turned my back on religion. I looked at my peers who believed, and I thought, you mindless sheep, why live a just life, or why make up for sins? If you could die at any minute, or be robbed of the people who mean the most to you in the world, what's the point? This was one of the lowest points in my life. I felt betrayed. I felt lied to. I didn't believe. This went on for a few months, and I didn't want to attend church. I resented my school for being religious, and for those of you who don't know, I go to Catholic school. And we'd stand for prayer, and it would remind me of how much my family had lost. One day during religion class, we started a movie. Usually a movie in religion class means I get to sleep in class for the next 3 days. I'm also very ADD, or attention deficit disorder. And the chances of me actually watching the movie and retaining any of the information are very slim. But for some reason, that day and the next 2 days, I was fully attentive. The movie is called When Bad Things Happen to Good People. The speaker, Rabbi Kushner, talked about dealing with the loss of his son to an incurable illness and how that affected him and his wife. Now you must be thinking, Presbyterian guy, Catholic church, now talking to me about a rabbi. But bear with me. He felt so betrayed by the very creator he dedicated his life to, and for a while he lost his faith. He then came to the conclusion that to believe in a good and just God, you can't believe he makes these things happen, but he's there to mourn with the families. He's there to shoulder the weight. He will be there to cry with his people at atrocities, and he'll be there to celebrate the good times, but he doesn't make it happen. This really spoke to me. I felt I was meant to watch this. He was feeling so many things that I was feeling. He changed my faith. He struggled with the questions that I no doubt think many of you have struggled with, but through it all, he was able to find God again. This made me look at myself and try again, and I'm glad I did. Recently, I attended a funeral for a close friend of mine's mother. I sat in the service, and I listened to the eulogy, and again I thought to myself, why did this happen to them? Why would God do this to them? But then the voice of Rabbi Kushner rang in my head, and it occurred to me that God probably felt the same as I did. He was there to mourn with us, not to take. It is as the Beatitudes tell us, God blesses those who mourn, for they will be comforted, and I find relief in this in my life.
The Beatitudes tell us that God has a special love for those in the world with what some might call less desirable traits. Blessed are the meek, blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are the meek. The Beatitudes remind us that even when we don't love something about ourselves, there is still a place for us in God's heart. I find that I sometimes need to remind myself about how much those around me love and care about me. Sometimes I feel like we become blind to it, even when it's always surrounding us. The past couple of months, I have been interning at the oncology hematology office where my mom received her own treatment for breast cancer 4 years ago. Throughout the entire Throughout the entire experience of my internship, I've had the opportunity to meet, learn the stories of, and connect with the patients. There are many stories I have learned, and many that would be appropriate to tell you all about today, but one in particular stands out. I was spending the afternoon in the back portion of the office, where the nurses stay hard at work providing care. A man, who we will call Tom, was brought in by his wife in a wheelchair. Marcy Ann, a nurse I frequently shadowed, was going to take care of him on this day. I watched as she helped him into his chair, and then I followed her into another area where they keep the medicines, and she explained to me that Tom struggles with his memory. I asked her, "How do you normally handle this situation?" as I frequently asked questions about the different ways in which they provided care. She said, "It's always important to tell the patient what to expect, whether they remember it or not." Then we went out to give Tom his treatment. She asked me to help her, as Tom was often afraid of the prick that would come when she accessed his port for chemo. She explained to Tom, "Lizzie here is going to help us by holding back your t-shirt so I can access your port." He nodded and hummed a little song to himself. I asked him, "What song are you singing, Tom?" And he grinned. "He's always singing that song," she said, as she let out a quiet laugh. Then she proceeded to tell me about Tom's story a little bit more. She pointed to a woman laying in a chair several seats over. "That's Tom's wife," she said. His wife poked her head up upon hearing this, and then Marcy Ann continued, saying, No, you lay down and take a rest over there. I'll take care of him. You take care of him all the time. You need a rest." She turned to me and Tom and explained that Tom's wife has never left his side. She's always been there for him, and she's strong, and she's kind, and she loves him very much. Marcy Ann also told me that, although his wife may look older, that if anyone was to mess with her husband, they'd better watch out because she would never let anything happen to him. Tom was still humming his song when the nurse accessed his port and his wife fell asleep. Tom didn't really know what was going on around him. He probably didn't realize that he was receiving treatment of some kind. He probably didn't realize that his wife was resting after taking care of him day after day after day. And even though I'm sure he knows it in his heart, he probably didn't realize just how much love was surrounding him in that moment, just how much love his wife surrounds him with every day. Tom was not the only person in that room who was surrounded by love without knowing it. Tom's wife was surrounded by Marcy Ann's love, by her want to help her through her struggle. Myself and Marcy Ann were surrounded by Tom's love, because I'm certain he was grateful for the care that we were trying to provide him with. And we all were surrounded by God's love. I find that I often overlook God's love when life gets hard. When everything is going right, it's easy to believe that he's watching over me. But when my mother was dealing with her treatment, I didn't feel any love for him at all. I kept asking myself, why her and why us? What did we do to deserve this? I had to realize that my mom's cancer was no one's fault, not even God's. Even when we turn our backs on him, like I had begun to do, he still loves us. It took me a long time to realize that he still loves me, even when I can't love him back. When we are at our worst, our rock bottom, when we feel like there's no one left to listen and no one left to care, we need to remind ourselves that God is always there. He might challenge us and throw obstacles in our way, but it's all part of his plan. Even when you can't love him back, he loves you all the same.
Hi. When I was a kid, I didn't know much. But what I knew for sure, which is more than I can say now. I have had a remarkably hard time trying to distinguish what is real from what is not, and to the best of my ability, I want to share some of that story with you today. One thing I've always known was real was my younger self. A little girl named Catherine with freckles and horribly crooked teeth. She came to church every single Sunday. She made everyone laugh during the time for young disciples and socialized with a group of older women during fellowship hour. To her, this church and this congregation felt like home, like one big warm hug. They made her feel like she was fantastic, and everything she did was fantastic, and no one could tell her otherwise. To that little girl, there was no place on earth that was as wonderful as Morrisville Presbyterian Church. It was her special place where she was accepted and loved and safe. And then she grew up, and she started to realize that not every place is like this place. Not every group of people is like this congregation. And maybe she wasn't as fantastic as everyone had been making her feel for as long as she could remember. When I got to middle school, things just changed. Not just mentally or emotionally, but chemically. I developed a numbing depression that has had its dull hands wrapped around my throat for the last 5 years or so. I don't like using the word depression because it's overdone, but that doesn't change the fact that that's what it is, and it doesn't make it any less real either. I remember the first time that it really set in. My whole body felt like one huge bruise that felt sore upon the slightest contact. I felt like I was seeing the whole world from inside me and was somehow being rejected by every single piece of it all at once. Like nothing, not even my friends or family or God or my own body could accept what I was and what was happening in my brain. I didn't feel accepted. I didn't feel loved. I didn't feel safe. I can't really explain the feeling. If you've felt it, you know. But no matter how many metaphors I make, the feeling doesn't become any easier to understand. While I've been living in this place, I spent so much time thinking about that little girl. And I've thought about how much all of you loved her. And because I'm not her anymore, in my mind, you're disappointed. In my mind, I let you down. In my mind, you would be a lot happier if I were still that little girl instead of this moody teenager with a shaved head. All that remains is her freckles and her voice, and everything else about me feels like it has become a lesser version of what it used to be. If it was as easy as being that girl again, I would do it in a heartbeat, but she's gone. I feel like I lost a leg when I lost her, because she was my motivation to be anything I wanted to be in this world. And now I just feel like I'm an inside-out black hole that instead of sucking everything towards it, it destroys what's inside and it spills it far away into space. I feel like there is no place for anything I've loved or known to land inside me. And I'm well aware that that doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make sense to me either. And I really do miss that girl. Every single day I think about her and how disappointed and confused she would be if she had the chance to meet me today. My lowest point in all of this was last April on Good Friday. I found myself in a hospital room, in a hospital gown, surrounded by people whose problems were much bigger than mine. I didn't belong there. I was scared and uncomfortable, so I went home. It was strange. I felt like an alien in my house, and I felt like an alien when I returned to church and school too. Everything looked and felt unfamiliar to me. And by the way, I'm sure there was nothing theological about this occurring on Good Friday. Somewhere between then and now, my soul began to heal. I believe it was last summer when my best friend asked me if I believed in God. At the time, I had said no. But somewhere along the way, I think I found God all over again. In some ways, that one conversation jump-started my faith because it was the first time I had someone like me who I could really talk with about God. Most days, I still feel like I'm living in that pit, and it feels really vacant and oversized. But Christian theology tells me that Easter is coming in 3 days, which I believe to be true. And every day, I'm surer and surer that Easter is coming, which is a far cry from where I was last April. Today, I feel very comfortable with my relationship with God. I feel accepted and loved and safe. I don't know what Easter will look like, but I hope you're there to see it, because I want you to be proud of me. And I am grateful that whether I truly believe it or not, I have been promised that, like that little girl, you will accept me, love me, and help me to feel safe indefinitely.